Former President Bill Clinton, who is also a New Yorker now, joins me from his office in Harlem this evening, which is at the other end of Manhattan from the World Trade Center. Mr. President, thank you very much for being with us tonight. You were in Australia when all this happened. It was late at night, I presume, when you got the word. How did you receive the news that there had been a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and then the Pentagon?
Tom, right after the first plane hit, my friend Bruce Lindsay, who was in New York, called me and was on the phone with me looking at the second plane hit the World Trade Center. So I heard about it live, if you will, on the telephone, and then I turned the television on and tried to find my wife, and eventually I got her, and we talked several times. I stayed up all night long. I was concerned about my daughter, and she was in New York in Lower Manhattan when the events occurred. And obviously I kept up with it on television and talked to people as I could find them through the night.
You were brought back on a military plane. Was the Secret Service worried about your security, that you might have been a target?
I don't know. The Bush administration was kind enough to give me a plane. I thought I should be back in America and back in New York. And they provided me a plane, so I flew from Australia to Guam and then on to the United States. And I was glad to be back home with our people here and to do what I could to encourage people in the recovery efforts.
You had your own experiences with Osama bin Laden. He attacked the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Many people are looking back now and say we simply didn't do enough. We launched 2 missile strikes against a target in Sudan and one in Afghanistan. We missed him. In retrospect, should there have been a higher level of attack, a war, if you will, against terrorism at that time?
Well, we did what we thought we could. Actually, we had quite good intelligence that he and his top lieutenants would be in his training camp. So I ordered the cruise missile attacks, and we didn't tell anybody, including the Pakistanis whose airspace we had to travel over, until the last minute. And unfortunately, we missed them, apparently not by very long. We killed a number of terrorists, destroyed the camp, but we didn't get him or his top lieutenants. And I made it clear that we should take all necessary action to try to apprehend him and get him. We never had another chance where the intelligence was as reliable to justify military action. He's very elusive. He spends the night in different places, often stays in caves. There were times when he tried to hide among a lot of women and children. It was a tough nut to crack, but the world has changed now. And I think the pressure that President Bush and the administration is putting on the Taliban and also on the Pakistanis, and the statements the Pakistanis have made, and the unity we've got around the world. We finally got other countries as concerned about this as we are. I think all these things, we might even have a chance to get him apprehended and handed over. But I certainly think the most important thing now is for all of us to rally behind our president and the administration in their efforts to build a global coalition. I have been really gratified by the support that other countries have given us, and I think we've got to go get him now, and we've got to break this network down, and the rest of us have to be there supporting it every step of the way.
There's always the possibility that terrorists will strike back in retaliation if there's a war. We now know how vulnerable Washington is. Are we going to have to put a permanent air cover over the nation's capital, or even examine the possibility of missiles at the White House and the Pentagon?
Well, I think, first of all, when the president's in residence at the White House, there is security on the roof of the White House to handle most things. I don't suppose it could stop a plane that big. And so all that will have to be re-examined. But I think it's quite important that we not shut down the fundamental means of transportation and communication and movement. We can't be intimidated by this. That's handing them a victory. And yes, if we take action, they may retaliate. But the evidence is that action is still more effective. We know when something terrible happens. And this obviously is an unspeakable tragedy. But we also, after the Africa embassy bombings, took down several bin Laden cells in several countries and prevented planned terrorist attacks in the United States and the Middle East over the millennium that included blowing up planes going out of LA airport, hijacking a plane. There was even an attempt to, a plan to assassinate the Pope, a plan to blow up a Christian religious site in the Middle East. So we have been successful in stopping a number of these things, and it doesn't hurt. You have to be strong, and if you're afraid of retaliation and you don't do anything, then all you have are your defenses, and defense is not enough. As we saw here last week, all the things we stopped still don't count for much in the end if 5,000 people lay dead, 5,000 Americans and people from 40 other countries, totally innocent civilians. So we have to have offense as well as defense.
This incident has brought a lot of people back together, including you and Vice President Al Gore. You spent the night together and then went down to Washington. Is that the first time that you talked at length?
Well, it was the longest conversation we had. He was stranded in Austria, and so he flew to Canada, and he was driving all the way from Canada to Washington, and he called me. I told him to come stay with me, and we'd fly down the next day to the memorial service. And we spent 2.5 hours talking about this, about all the things we'd done over the last several years to try to get bin Laden and his network and to try to combat terrorism generally, to increase the defenses of the United States. We speculated about what more could be done, what we needed to do now. And both of us agreed that the most important thing we could do is to support the President and the administration and know that they're going to take all the appropriate actions.
Finally, Mr. President, is the United States going to have to play down and dirty in this war on terrorism and get over what have been a lot of restrictions on the kind of spying that we do and even lift the ban on assassinations?
Well, let's talk about that in a minute. First of all, the ban that was put in effect under President Ford only applies to heads of state. It doesn't apply to terrorists. So I can assure you we've been trying to get Osama bin Laden for the last several years. And therefore, that's not an obstacle. Secondly, the CIA put in place a directive saying that if unsavory characters, that is, people that had abused human rights themselves, for example, were going to be used as sources and paid, that there had to be approval above the field level. The director of the CIA says there's not a single instance in which the CIA has declined to use a source in a terrorist case. But apparently some field operatives feel that they may be somewhat constrained. That ought to be reviewed, and if so, we ought to change the rules. But so far as I know, every potential human intelligence source was explored, and we had a lot of them. That's why we were able to roll up a lot of the bin Laden cells in other countries around the world, and why we were able to find a lot of the people, for example, that did the first World Trade Center bombing, that did the CIA bombing or killing there. So we have had some success with human intelligence. We need more of it. We need to do whatever is necessary. And yes, we need to do more to get more human intelligence. In the end, it's very difficult to get all this done with satellites and tapping into telephones and breaking into computers. You need to have people on the ground in the area if you're going to nail these people. And again, I think the fact that we have so much support around the world now, and there's such unanimity of feeling about how evil this is and how it has to be stomped out, that I think we're going to see a lot of progress. And as I said, if I were over there in the Taliban shoes, or as the President of Pakistan has already said he wants to cooperate, they need to think long and hard about whether this is a load they want to keep carrying. The best thing for them to do is to give him up. They'd save a lot of lives and enable us to continue our long-term war against terrorism. Getting Osama bin Laden is the beginning, not the end of this process. There's still a network there. There's still money to be found. There's still computer networks to be cracked. There's still other terrorists out there. But it's an important first step. And I strongly support what President Bush said about holding countries who harbor him accountable. And I think we're going to see some real progress here. We just have to continue to stay united as a country. This has got to be beyond any sort of division. We have to speak with one voice. We have to be determined. We have to remember the people. Hillary and I saw the day before yesterday, we were taking a walk in the park, and a woman came up to us who's still looking for her husband. She was with her 4 sisters-in-law, and they think they've lost a fireman. I met a man last night at a Rosh Hashanah service in my hometown who, along with another person, carried a disabled person down 84 floors in the World Trade Center. The plane hit one floor above him, and they all made it to safety. Those are the kind of Americans that make us all proud of our country and know that we have to see this fight through to the end.
Mr. President, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Welcome home.
Thank you, Tony.